All right. If tradition holds, this is when I say something like, is this working? And yes, it is. Hooray. Eventually, I'm going to get the hang of using Zoom, and you guys are not going to be ready for it. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Virtuous Insider. Thank you guys for joining us for today. I'm seeing folks coming in, getting settled. This is fantastic. Glad to have you guys with us for today. I want to make sure that we can jump in and we have plenty of time to go over our content for today. Today, we are doing another one of our really fun Meet the Team sessions. We've got some great folks here that have joined the Virtuous team who have been fundraisers, have been out there doing it, and they're kind of sharing basically their how they did it story, which is really neat. And we want to get to that. Before we do, though, just as always, a few quick housekeeping items. We are recording the session for today. It will be available on the support page. So if you want to go back and you want to relive this experience over and over, you can. You can go watch that. Go watch any of the Insider sessions at any point. And because we do want to try to get some good audio, or at least as good as we can, we do have everybody muted. We're all used to that. We've been on Zoom for the last year and a half of our lives. If you do have a question, though, we love questions. So please go ahead and use the Q&A box and send that in. That way we can answer that. I know sometimes we'll get questions in the chat, which is great, but if we have a really lively chat, we don't want to miss anything that goes by. If it's in the Q&A, we can make sure we can address it. And of course, I'm using we, not as the royal we, talking about. So I am joined today by Megan Donahue, which is always lovely on the Insider. Megan, thank you for making time to join us today.
Oh, I'm happy to join you, Scott.
That is fantastical. And we do have our guest star for today. We've got Dave Curtis from our marketing team here to share his How I Did It story. Dave, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
You sounded so surprised that I asked. That was great. I love it. It's very natural. You're doing good. So in terms of the agenda for today, we are going to hear Dave's success story, talking about his email welcome series and kind of what his approach was and how he did it. So he'll share all about that. We will take a look at how we can take some of the things that Dave was able to do successfully. How can we use some of those things and do those in Virtuous, right? How can we apply that to what you were able to do in the tool? And then, of course, if you've got questions, we sure hope we have answers. So go ahead, send those in. We'll address those. And then that'll be it. We'll say goodbye for another week here on the Insider. So that's enough of you guys having to listen to me. It is time for the interview. So I will turn it over to Megan and Dave.
Well, thanks, Scott. So Dave, just to kick us off, can you give us a little overview of your organization, where you were previously, just size and mission, and anything you think it's important for us to know?
Sure, absolutely. For 14 years, I worked for an organization called Food for the Hungry. We were a faith-based organization that did international development and disaster relief. And while I served in a variety of roles for 3.5 years, I had the opportunity to help run our digital marketing team. And so it's a $150 million organization, so sort of a mid-major organization. And it also had quite a growing and burgeoning child sponsorship program. So when talking about this email welcome series, it's in reference to those that were sponsoring a child through Food for the Hungry.
Okay, so a population of pretty committed donors who are fairly familiar with the organization and its mission.
They would hopefully become that. That was
okay, so you're looking to acquire those.
Yes. Great.
So tell us about this email welcome series.
Sure. So as I mentioned, child sponsorship is a huge part of the funding stream at Food for the Hungry. Again, it was a $150 million organization, give or take, whatever each year. About 50% to 55% came from private contributions, and a high percentage, 80 to 90% of that actually came from child sponsorship. So we're talking about 120,000, maybe even up to 130,000 sponsored children in our program and in interaction. So it's a form of pledge. If people aren't used to what child sponsorship is, it's a form of monthly pledge that's connected to a particular child, and you're able to develop a correspondence with that child, really engage with them, learn from that interaction, etc. So it was a very important funding stream for Food for the Hungry. And so we wanted to make sure that as sponsors were starting their commitment, that they were that we were welcoming them well, and especially through digital means. The most common way in which a sponsor came through or was acquired or started was through a music concert. Okay, so you're thinking about, hey, I'm at this big concert and I'm having this deeply, emotional experience. Mostly in our space is a Christian music concert, so Toby Mac or Switchfoot, etc.
Mhm.
You're having this amazing experience, memorable. You're with your kids or you're with your friends, and then either the artist or someone that's a friend of the artist comes on stage and tells a very deeply moving, experience about child sponsorship and being in their life changing from this interaction. So there was a highly emotional experience that where the donor opted in, right,
Mhm.
to this donation process, to this pledge. And so what we were trying to solve was, how do we make sure that that experience is prolonged through and beyond this deeply emotional, finite though experience? And just our generic welcome series felt like a bit of a whiplash, right? Because essentially the donor was saying yes to the ask from the artist or the artist's friend, and saying yes to supporting this child. We were the conduit, right? Like we were like way down the list of who they are really ascribing to this commitment, and so we wanted to make sure we could really I guess responsively listen and connect with the donor correctly. And so we were making sure that we would develop content that was curated, special and specific to the artist of where that sponsor was acquired, and make sure that there was a transition period of saying, okay, you said yes to the artist or at this experience from the artist. Let's introduce you to us as Food for the Hungry. So over time, we can say, thank you, artist. Now let's continue this interaction together, between the charity, between the organization and the sponsor. Also, kind of technically speaking, understanding that there's a bit of a dead time in communication that happens between when that sponsor says yes and when they might get their first letter from a child. And obviously that's what they want to get. We don't want to get in the way of that. So how can we properly use that time to really make sure that we become a trusted partner, that trusted conduit for that experience between the sponsor and the child? So did I answer the question all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. I think that's for those listening, what really struck me is that this is a challenge that we face whenever the conduit to the nonprofit organization, the thing that brings people in, isn't necessarily the nonprofit itself, but it's a spokesperson or an advocate or a peer-to-peer fundraiser. There's always that question of how do we start to transition that relationship from whatever brought them in to the organization? And it sounds like this email welcome series was a really good way to do that. So you were saying that you segmented it by the artists that they came in through?
That's correct. So we would make sure that the lists were built from the tour or the given artist. And then the content that we would put in that welcome series, we would have to arrange it ahead of time and make sure that we had, whether it be a thank you video from the artist himself, him or herself, or some sort of promo video of showing the artist engaging with the work that Food for the Hungry was doing, and sprinkle that throughout. In addition to sharing with them about, what does this child sponsorship thing mean that you've now committed to?
Excellent. And did you see any difference once you started adopting that strategy in retention or engagement?
We did, and the question of what problem are you trying to solve? Attrition was exactly it, because
Mm-hmm.
especially with that hyper-filled emotional experience, there's like this hangover period that we would call it, the hangover period afterwards, in which people like got home and were like, wait, what did I commit to? I committed $35 a month. I don't, you know, it starts to disconnect, starts to unravel. And so attrition, especially in the first 3 months of these events, particularly this artist program type of events, was quite high in comparison to everything else. So how do we try to bring that down a bit? That we make sure that no, reconfirm the reason why they said yes, and do it with the people and the voices that where they said yes the first time, who they said yes to the first time. So the answer is yes. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact numbers, and I don't want to just make up stuff, but I can tell you it was statistically significant, and it was definitely noticeable to the point where we're like, all right, this is something we have to do as much as possible in order to really shepherd this relationship with the donors.
And so much about it, I think, is about building trust, which you did by saying, like, these are the people that got them here. So we continue to involve that, we continue to do it, and then kind of transition that trust to the organization. But I think it's important to recognize that under those circumstances, like, that trust doesn't necessarily already exist. You have to build it.
Right. And they were trusting the person that was inviting them, which was the artist or the artist friend that was up there making the appeal. Again, the whiplash from, hey, I said yes to Switchfoot's request. Who's this Food for the Hungry group that, that's who.
Why are they charging my credit card?
Yeah. So, and so again, we want to make sure that we're treating our donors as humans. Like, we understand that's the situation. There wasn't us in our logo that they were saying yes to. That's okay. We'll take that over time. But let's make sure that we reinforce why Switchfoot said, invited them to this experience. And this is why Switchfoot thought it was the reason to sponsor a child with Food for the Hungry. And over time, we'll give you the reasons why you should trust us as an organization.
Absolutely. And I apologize, everyone, for any background noise. They're tearing up my street immediately out, like right over there. So we have some loud noises. But yeah, I think, again, like seeing your donors as individuals, starting to look into like why they gave and what made them make that choice. And then honoring that and continuing the conversation from there is really the heart of responsive fundraising, instead of just saying, like, these are our organizational communications. Now you get them.
Yeah, and there's a quote that our colleague and friend Brian Funk has said before that I think is at the heart of these types of welcome series, which is, we want to reduce the distance between the donor and their impact. And a welcome series, or whatever their initial communications, is pretty critical to making sure that you're showing your commitment to that. It's not we're not just trying to throw everything at you about why you should trust us. We want to maintain that connection that you have to this impact that you want to make, which in this case is, I want to impact the life of this child, and I want to be transformed by that relationship as well. So, okay, great. We're gonna make sure we foster that and facilitate that as best we can. And here's how we're gonna try to do that. And that's what we try to do through this communication series.
Fantastic. So about how many pieces of communication were part of the series before people went into regular communication?
Sure. So we would try to keep it simple because you don't want to inundate people, but I think it was 4. It was a series of 4 emails, and we kind of had a flow of what we were trying to do, whether it be, first, it's a heavy dose of the artist, and their involvement, and again, having them thank directly the sponsor that said yes to the appeal. Then it was the artist talking a little bit more about Food for the Hungry and saying, hey, again, reminding you, this is why I believe this is a trusted partner. And then it would be, we try to scale it down into a little bit more of the Food for the Hungry's branded voice, and make sure that we're, communicating different things. Another thing that we included in the welcome series right off the bat was trying to set up some sort of opt-in for what are they interested most, right? I think that's a best practice that we talk about a lot. So some sort of survey, hey, beyond obviously connecting with the child that you're sponsoring, what themes are you interested? Are you interested in clean water? Are you interested in education materials? And so then we could actually develop specific curated donor journeys and communications that they would be kind of put into a theme of sorts, where we could make sure that when we have opportunities throughout the year, we're sending things that are most relevant to that particular donor.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Because I think it's easy when we think about communication streams and series and things like that to be like, what are we going to say? What are we going to say? We're going to tell them this. We're going to tell them these other things. It's also a great listening opportunity, as you point out. And at a moment where they're, I think, more likely to be engaged with you because it's at the exciting point of the relationship where they've made the choice, they're interested and engaged, to start getting that information of what is most interesting to you so that you can keep getting, continuing a conversation that's relevant to them. That's really exciting. So many best practices for responsive fundraising going on.
There you go. Didn't even know it when we were doing it. Now we call it more responsive fundraising, and fantastic, which is helpful. It puts it within a framework, and that actually makes it actionable. We thought we were just whipping it up on the fly.
Well, thank you so much, Dave.
Absolutely.
It's great to learn from your story and your success. I think there's a lot of takeaways for everyone for conversations with donors and welcoming. So Scott, let's turn it over to see how this works in Virtuous.
Yes, well, and I wanted to comment on something you said too, right there at the end too, Dave, which is that you were doing responsive fundraising without knowing it. And I think the key is responsive fundraising as a framework isn't something that was invented as like an academic exercise, or in a vacuum. Responsive fundraising came out of stories like yours. Hey, what are the practices that have been impactful? What are the things that have worked? What are the things that we see donors are responding to? And like you said, how can we take that and make it something that's actionable and repeatable and has a framework, right? That's the real thing with responsive fundraising. Like, it's easy to say, well, just listen, connect, suggest, repeat, do those things, and you're going to be great. But again, this wasn't like something where someone just decided to make a PowerPoint deck. This is stuff that was actually working in the real world that now we've kind of looked at and said, okay, what are the core tenets to this that I can take and apply to my welcome series, to all of my comms across all of the different channels that I'm using? What are the things that I want to be consistent, which I think is fantastic. And the other thing we've seen, and this is becoming like a theme on the Insider lately, and I promise it's accidental, but we've seen this with one of the other success stories we had when we had Shivani on to talk about her peer-to-peer campaign. And we did a great session recently with Give, Sign Up, Run, Sign Up. And in both cases, we talked about peer-to-peer and events and other things where, like you said, there's a certain amount of distance between the nonprofit and the donor. Someone's being asked by a third party. And we've seen a couple of times now how important it is to make sure that you do jump in and introduce yourself to that donor and establish that relationship, and don't rely on the fact that they like that artist to keep them around, because that isn't keeping them around for very long. But if you can start to immediately introduce yourself and who you are, and talk about the impact that they can have by partnering with you, then you're really more likely to retain those donors. And I really like the sort of curve that you laid out, where you kind of start heavier on the artist side, and then that kind of diminishes as at the same time your content increases. That's a really nice way to kind of ease somebody in, and not just, again, have the whole "who's this on my credit card" statement. That's not what we want. But I think that's awesome. And Dave, you're getting some thanks in here, which I think is great. Someone else is doing a child sponsorship series, so they're just going to use the Curtis method. I think that's really cool. And Joel did share with us that they've got a welcome series going on, and they're using an ebook giveaway as part of that welcome series. So it's really neat to hear folks are experimenting with some of this stuff. And so if we're talking about doing this in Virtuous, I should probably share my screen and not make you stare at my face. I apologize to the wider community here. But if we're doing this in Virtuous right away, right? When we think about a welcome series, we think about automation. Makes sense. That's how you want to do things like that. And you can go into the automation page and you can build a welcome series. And we've even got some of our best practice templates have some new donor welcome series, and there's a new subscriber welcome series. So kind of a pre-donor flow to introduce your organization to someone. And for each of these, it's pretty easy to create these right out of the gate, right? You can hit create workflow. You can come in and give this a name. This is our insider welcome sample thingy. And I can create that workflow, and that's going to come with all of the tags, all of the custom fields, anything that's related to that workflow. Those things will all get created right away. I will have to go customize the email content unless you're a big fan of having, our fake human fund in there and things like that. But a lot of the emails you're going to see in these best practice workflows, when you go view the email content, it's actually got the instructions in there for, hey, what should you say in this email? So if you're a little stuck for what should the message be for email 1, when you click on it, it'll actually say, hey, here's what kind of content you want to put in here. And these are great. And these give you a great way to hit the ground running and start with a welcome series. But one of the other things in Dave's story that really struck me is the way that you really tailored that welcome series to, in this case, right, the artist and the event that someone participated in. And I think that once you've started with something like this, because we all know the highest impact you can have, the number one return on investment automation, we see it again and again, is a new donor welcome series. That way you can increase your retention, right? There's a lot of folks who give once and then they just fall off the edge of the earth. You want to try to keep those folks around. Like you said, Dave, shortening that space, right, to impact is really critical. I'm crediting you. Brian's not here, so we don't have to give him credit. But this is really important. But then starting to look at the different donor journeys and say, okay, we want to take this a step further, because I can have this series have steps that run in parallel for first-time donor. What is the journey for someone who is a first-time donor but who's been a subscriber? What is the journey for a first-time donor who's been a volunteer versus a first-time donor who's brand new to our organization? Because I got to tell you, if someone's been a volunteer or they've attended your concerts or they've attended your events, there is no quicker way to really shut down that relationship you're building than sending them something when they donate to say, hey, welcome, great to meet you, right? They already feel like they know you. They feel like they've taken the next step in that relationship they have with you. And so you just want to be really careful and start to map out those different journeys. What are the starting points for these folks and what is different? Many of the actions might be the same, but the email content might be slightly different because I'm not welcoming you to our organization. I'm thanking you for taking the next step in this relationship together. And whether it is having specific content based on an event that you use to acquire that donor, whether it is just keeping in mind what those different sort of acquisition points are, that's really vital to having a strong welcome series at the end of the day, and then kind of getting everybody into that same flow. But you can always use these as a starting point, and then I can come in, and if I wanted to add another step, because I want to branch off this first-time donor, I want to look at first-time donor who's a new contact, first-time donor who's an existing contact. I can always modify these existing best practice templates by adding additional steps. So I could add an additional step. I could quickly add a filter here to add some criteria for who I want to flow into that step. And then I can reorganize all of these steps, right? This is just a starting point, and then you can modify it before you let this thing off the chain. So do keep that in mind. We've certainly got tons of content in some of our recorded webinars and some of our training documentation on automation, so I don't want to take too much time to jump into this. But I did see a question come through, and that gives us a really neat way to segue to question time, as we like to call it here. And that question was about, will a new donor thank you get sent automatically, or do you have to manually send it? I feel like I give this answer a lot. Megan's probably heard me say it even plenty of times. But the answer is, it depends. It really does. It depends on, again, how did that donor come in? If we're talking about someone who's using Virtuous Giving, the minute someone makes their online donation, they can get a form confirmation email. that immediate dopamine hit right away that says, thank you so much, right? And in today's day and age, that just lets them know this went through, right? I ordered food the other day for delivery, and immediately I checked my email. If I don't have the email, then I screwed up making the order, right? Same thing. Did I make the donation? So they can get that thank you right away. And then anything else that's going to happen is going to happen after I've imported that gift. So once that's imported to Virtuous and it's matched to a contact, if I'm doing an automated welcome series, the following morning is when that'll pick up and it'll start taking email actions. And so if you think about this from a time perspective in terms of, say, something like Virtuous Giving, the minute that donor makes a donation, they're going to get an email. Thank you so much. You're a rock star, whatever it is. It could have some specific messaging in it based on the page they were on. Dave, like you said, were they on the clean water page? Were they on this page? So maybe that form confirmation email is a little bit different. That's fine. And then the next day, you're going to do gift processing and you're going to import that gift. And when you do, you're going to run receipting. So if they get an email receipt, then on day 2, they're getting an email receipt. Their tax receipt says thank you. And then on day 3, automation is going to run. And if you've got a new donor welcome series, well, they're going to get an email then too, right? So potentially they could get 3 emails in 3 days. And then we get into the space Dave said of, we don't want them to think, oh my gosh, what have I gotten into, right? You want to be really careful about that. And it is important to keep that timing in mind when you're setting up a donor welcome series. You do want to think about, okay, how many touch points are too many, right? How do I want to space these out so I don't scare them off? I want to get to know them. I want to build a relationship. I don't want to chase them away. It's basically what it comes down to. Okay, shoot, boy. See, I was telling Dave before we started, hey, the Insider goes by so fast, and it does. We got like 3 minutes left. And instead of me having to talk like the micro machine guy, I wanted to make sure that we can actually get in here to talk about what's coming up on the Insider. I've seen some other things coming in the chat, which is great. But I do want to mention, please join us next week for a special edition. Next week, we've got kind of a big thing going on here. You may have heard about it. The Responsive Nonprofit Summit is happening next week. It'll be a great opportunity to learn from a lot of folks in the nonprofit space, in the nonprofit world. Megan, on top of things, just dropped the link into the chat for you to be able to check that out and register. It is free, 3 days of virtual learning wall to wall. And so while that's happening, we're going to have a little bit of a sort of a breakout session, right? A little bit of I don't know, counter programming, which will be the Insider. And just like we did last time we had the summit, the Insider is going to be a little bit more of just putting the training team in the dunk tank. So if you've got a question, you can come in, we'll be hanging out, and you can ask us whatever question you would like. Hopefully it's a question about Virtuous, or else we're in trouble. And if you want to make sure that your question gets answered, you can go ahead and shoot it to us ahead of time. You can email it to us at training@virtuous.org. You can also let us know if you'd like to share your own success story like Dave did today on a future edition of the Insider. We would love to have you, and I'll bet everyone else would love to hear from someone who is not me. So that would be great. Love to have that. I know Megan's put in the times for the summit in the chat as well. Fantastic. So make sure you do join us. Send us an email if you'd like us to answer your question. And as always, I do like to leave you guys with some words from someone who is smarter than I. And this time, I wanted to pick something that talked a little bit about, welcoming, but also something that I think is a theme that comes up a lot of times when we work with clients who are starting to work in Virtuous. We must welcome the future, remembering that soon it will be the past. And we must respect the past, remembering that it was once all that was humanly possible. I really like this idea because a lot of times when folks are moving to Virtuous and learning to use new tools, sometimes there's this feeling that, oh my gosh, all the stuff I did before was wrong or bad. Help me refactor everything I did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and make it match to Virtuous. Well, you were using different tools then. And let's be honest, they were probably bad because they weren't virtuous. So we don't need to go back and change the past. We just need to make sure that we can bring it in a way that you can still report on what happened. And at the same time, we're going to embrace the future. We're going to embrace the fact that now you do have better tools. So what are the things I can do differently going forward? Always knowing that pretty soon those will be in the past because I'm always going to be embracing and learning new things. So I really think that's something that we work at here. George Santayana, I almost pronounced it wrong, You probably know him a little bit more for one of his other quotes, because he's the person who said, "Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it." So that's him. Yeah, he's the guy. Dave's shocked. So there you go. So before we wrap things up, I'll put you guys on the spot. First, I'll start with you, Megan. Are there any final words of wisdom you wanted to leave folks with?
Yeah, I think this is a good thing of, again, if you're starting, you start where you are, right? And so if you don't have an email welcome series right now, one automated welcome email is better than nothing. It's 100% better than nothing. And a series is even better. So start where you are. You don't have to boil the whole ocean, but taking those little steps to become more responsive will always serve you well.
Excellent. And Dave almost has like a prop set for this quote because he's got the history behind him. Dave, any final words of wisdom from you?
Also, just to try things out, to test or to optimize for the sake of optimizing. Our friends at Next After would be very excited to hear that type of statement. So that's what we did. We kept on testing different things for the Welcome series and figured out formulas that worked well for the Artist Welcome series. So try things out, don't be afraid, and then learn from it.
That is awesome. And Dave, you're getting some love for your font. We got some font fans on the chat. And for those of you that did join our Product Pulse session last week, we do have a new institution here on the Insider. We do want to leave you with the Jason Van Loo dad joke of the week. He had a really good one last time. And so this time he did supply another dad joke for all of you, which is he wanted all of you to know he bought a wig for 25 cents. It was a small price to pay. I should have a rim shot sound effect for those. All right. Thank you, everybody. So glad you joined us this week. And hopefully we'll see you guys next week at the summit. And we'll see you for the Insider Q&A. Bye, everybody.